All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of Expected by Whom. We got to start with one of the oddest announcements of a jersey retirement I think I've ever seen. The Chicago Blackhawks announcing that Chris Chelios' number 7 will be retired there, but making the announcement at a Pearl Jam concert. This one very odd announcement in the way it was presented, but then two, Chris Chelios' number 7 being retired in Chicago after Brent Seabrook just wore it for 15 years strikes me as a little odd. I mean, what do you think about that, Sean?
I have a couple odd thoughts about this. The first is so one of the things is the logistical question. Because Chelios actually looked legit, like if you watch the video, he actually looked legitimately surprised about it. But in the video that they're showing, like on the background that they're going to retire his number, they put the date of the game retirement like right there, like in the video. It's going to be like in February, actually before they play Detroit, which we'll talk about in a second. So I'm actually curious of the logistics of this, normally when they're retiring a guy's number, and I know Chris Chelios isn't far from Chicago and everything like that, so it's not like him getting there would be difficult for anything, but normally when they're going to retire a guy's number, if it's going to be a big surprise thing, they tell him they're going to do it, and they keep the whole surprise, and then you get a date later because that's how it can be worked out to get it all done. So it was the whole logistics of me. The logistics for me were kind of weird. Of Chelios looked legitimately surprised. I don't know, maybe they had family or whatever, like block his calendar off or something like that. But it was still like, I'm like, how they're just telling him now, and they're already like, what if he had a wedding to go to that day or something like that? Like, just that was one of the silly, dumb things I thought about right away. The other thing that immediately came to mind was Brent Seabrook wore number 7 for 15 years in Chicago, and if you're going to, like, my kind of philosophy on retired numbers on something is if you felt that it wasn't worth taking out of circulation, it's probably not worth retiring in most cases. There are other examples that there are kind of things here and there that work, but like, for example, in Detroit, and it's a sour subject, but one of the things that still gives me hope they will do the right thing is 91 has at least not been in circulation, right? It's not like someone has shown up and they've given 91 out in camp to anyone. So I at least still have hope that it will be retired at some point in Detroit. But when you gave 7 to Seabrook, and then he wore it for 15 years, you basically kind of made it for, you kind of set it up. It was like, okay, no, we're not going to retire 7. And retired numbers are can always be kind of odd and have their different reasons. And there's been times where teams have done it for both players and everything like that. Like, I think Chicago might even have a couple, right, where there's a precedent of, but number 7 in my mind, number 7 in Chicago, and a Blackhawks fan could come on and tell me I'm wrong, but number 7 in my mind, the number 7 that actually won a Stanley Cup, if you want to go off things like that, is Brent Seabrook and not Chris Chelios. So this is an odd one.
Yeah, I just find it very weird, and really the history of the Blackhawks jersey retirements is also very interesting. Like, number 1's retired for Glenn Hall, and Glenn Hall plays back in the 50s and 60s. But that number's worn all the way until 1989. Even Ed Belfour gets to wear number 1, for a year in Chicago. And then, number 3 is retired, for Pierre Pilot and Keith Magnuson. But that number 3 gets issued all the way until 2004. And so now having number 7, which has a really strange history in Chicago with, guys like Ted Lindsay having worn it for a couple years. Phil Esposito wore it for a couple years. Bobby Hull wore it for a couple years. And then you get Chris Chelios that wears it for 7. And yes, like if you look at Chelios' career, his best years statistically are in Chicago. But he has the unique career where he played 7 or more seasons for 3 different original 6 franchises, all with having various levels of success across the board. I mean, in Montreal, he wins his first Norris. He wins a Stanley Cup there in 1986. And then in Chicago, he wins 2 Norris trophies, plays at arguably his highest level. And then he's dealt to Detroit, where he wins 2 more Stanley Cups, with the Wings in 02 and 08. And so he's a guy that has a very unique career trajectory. And it strikes me as odd for Chicago to do this with Brent Seabrook's career having only just ended. And unless there's a plan to sort of co-retire the number 7, it just feels like very weird timing for a player that, yes, he had his best years in Chicago, but they didn't achieve any team level success, and you're going to retire his number ahead of a guy that won 3 Stanley Cups there, playing on number 1 minutes, on the back end and playing there for 15 years. So I find the entire circumstance very weird. It goes back to my curmudgeon take that retired jerseys should be limited, given that you only really have 99 numbers that you're working with, given 99's taken out of circulation. And you have a number of teams that could just go to these Ring of Honors, instead of playing the song and dance like Detroit does, with 13 being out of circulation, 91's out of circulation, 6 is out of circulation, 16 is out of circulation. Like, nobody's getting issued these jerseys, but there's no banner for them. And it's like, just get it over with. Put them up on a Ring of Honor so you can reissue the number, but still honor their achievements. And that's sort of what I feel like should have happened in Chicago with number 7. Like, if you're not going to retire it for Seabrook, who gets you 3 cups and playing number 1 minutes for 15 years there, why are you doing it for Chelios, even though, yes, he did have his best years? That sort of feels very much like a Ring of Honor designation to me.
And I agree with you on that. Like, I think there are certain lines with the Ring of Honor, Hall of Fame, whatever you want to call it, is great. Where it's like, I think, and then I think you just be more selective in how you give that number out in the future, right? Like, if you're going to be, I've always had, from my time covering Dallas, I always thought the Stars did not retire Darian Hatcher's numbers, right? He wore number 2. He was the captain when they won the Stanley Cup. If you want to set a high bar for jersey retirement, that's fine. And I think that's fine. The Stars basically have gone with the guys' numbers they've retired: Zubov, Modano, Lehtinen. If by not retiring Hatcher's number, they set a high bar. But they should be given 2 to guys like Jyrki Jokipaka. And as much as I love Jyrki Jokipaka as a human, you just have to still kind of you shouldn't be giving 2 to, you don't just give 2 to anyone. You still like, okay, we're going to make sure this number still means something. You have to be a little bit more, you have to get the equipment guy on board to be a little bit more selective, right? Like, that's kind of how you have to make sure that this all happens. Like, honor the history, but also be like, well, this number has been worn well enough that some kid from camp is not all of a sudden just going to get it, right?
I mean, I totally agree. It's always it's just so weird to see sometimes. Another guy in Dallas that I think about now. Granted, he definitely doesn't meet the requirement of a jersey retirement, and he also had 2 numbers there. But Brett Hull, in 99, obviously scoring the cup clinching goal wearing 22, and then he switches to 16. And then a couple years later, you've got Sean Avery wearing that number at Dallas, and it's like, that just makes me feel all sorts of ways that, like, if I was a Dallas Stars fan and you've obviously had Brett Hull there for 3 years, gives you 3 of the best years in Dallas Stars history, I feel very weird about Sean Avery coming through and wearing that number down there. And so, it's things like that always strike me as odd. I'm going to be very much a curmudgeon about this. I strongly believe exactly what you said. Have that Ring of Honor, get the numbers up there, and then be very, very judicious with who gets that number moving forward, because that is a special number, for that team, for the organization, and for the fan base. And so, yeah, I'm definitely going to be maybe further out in left field than people would think I would be about this, but I don't know. It just strikes me the wrong way.
Yeah, I think a good litmus test will be really interesting to see how teams, when he finally does retire someday, 68 with Jágr, right? Because like there's a couple teams in my mind that you know right away, like obviously Pittsburgh, 68 is going to the rafters. We know that. But Jágr played for so many teams where and 68 should be treated like that, where that's a number where like you shouldn't really be wearing 68 unless you're like you don't give it to the kid out of camp and everything like that. But there's gonna be some gray areas where like Jágr with his time with knowing Ted Leonas's kind of showmanship attitude of things, it wouldn't surprise me if Washington did it. Now, he only played there for 3 seasons and everything like that, but part of the tit-for-tat Washington-Pittsburgh rivalry, it wouldn't surprise me if Washington wanted to very publicly show, hey, we have the all-time greatest goal scorer up here, and we have the guy who played more games than anyone else. Like, but it really shouldn't be. But Jágr, like, someday, 5-7 years from now, whenever he finally plays his last game and actually has time to go to jersey retirement ceremonies, I'm going to be really interested to see which teams try to use we had this Hockey Hall of Famer play for us. Let's pull him on there. Let's throw his number in the rafters.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting side of the coin. In my personal opinion, and again, this is very much an opinion here, I would only retire Jágr's number if I'm Pittsburgh. I wouldn't retire Jágr's number anywhere else.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Yeah. Like the New York stop was somewhat disastrous. The Washington stop didn't really go anywhere, and really the only thing I know about him in Washington is when Datsuk picks his pocket and has that great breakaway goal there. But Jágr in particular, I would really only do in Pittsburgh. But I want to be very clear that I want to make a distinction that this isn't. I'm not talking about the same situation as Josh Ho-Sang wanting to wear 66 for the Islanders to honor Mario Lemieux. Lemieux never played for the Islanders. That 66 has no meaning to the New York Islanders.
Yes, I agree with you on that, because that was ridiculous. That was ridiculous.
Like, people panning Josh Ho-Sang for wanting to wear 66 for the Islanders makes absolutely no sense to me. Like, let the kid wear 66. That's one of his favorite players. Do that. It's when it comes to a specific organization. Like, I would feel very weird if Pittsburgh reissued 68 to somebody. That doesn't make any sense to me. The same way that you probably should have felt weird if you were Chicago reissuing 7 to Seabrook. In fact, it got issued to Lyle Odeline right after they dealt Chris Chelios. And that's not a knock on Lyle Odeline. It's just, that's where I think teams should maybe be a little bit more judicious with these numbers. And it does feel very weird to come back 20 years later to retire that number, particularly in the case of a guy like Chelios, bringing us full circle, who played, 10 more years after he left Chicago, and won 2 Stanley Cups with your fierce rival. So it's a very weird topic. This is an all feels, all vibes, no analysis whatsoever. Just the way I feel about jersey numbers.
It will be good. I haven't looked it up yet today, but I'm looking forward to seeing the inevitable dozens, and I'm not arguing for or against him or whatever, but I know it's coming today. The 15 to 16 columns coming out of Chicago today of put some respect on Steve Larmer's name, because that will definitely be coming out of Chicago today, especially since his number 28 is still being worn by like Andres Eglund right now. So that's so I look forward to seeing all of that discourse come out on Twitter today, and or X, right? That's what it's called now. So
it's always another lovely day for discourse on X or Twitter, whatever you choose to call it. As always, it's another lovely day for discourse on Expected by Whom. So, folks, welcome back to an episode of Expected by Whom, a podcast exploring the world of hockey through unique lenses, brought to you by the Wing Wheel Podcast. We know a lot of you tuning in are Red Wings fans, and the Wing Wheel Podcast is the biggest and best Detroit Red Wings show out there. Find the show wherever you listen to or watch your podcast, and go to wingwheelpodcast.com for more. All right, so the bulk of what I wanted to spend our time before we get to our very special interview later today is you texted me about the Champions Hockey League rule changes. And this sort of caught, I think, the hockey sphere a little off guard when they were released, in that they were very innovative and very much focused on kind of how the power play would be impacted. And so for those who haven't seen the rules, I'll quickly outline them, and then Sean, I'll turn it to you. So the three rule innovations that the Champions Hockey League ruled out this year was, one, a team will remain shorthanded even if the opposing team scores a goal. So if you take a penalty and the team scores on that power play, they get to keep the power play and finish it out. It doesn't end just because they scored a power play goal. The second is, if you take a penalty and in the time it takes for you to touch that puck, the team that has that will be gaining the advantage ends up scoring a goal during that delayed penalty, they still get to keep the ensuing power play that's going to come. That hasn't historically been the case. Normally, if you score on the delayed penalty, you don't get the upcoming power play. And then finally, if a shorthanded team scores, that ends the minor penalty. So if you score a goal while shorthanded, you are now off the penalty kill. So Sean, I want to turn it to you because you told me you were going to do a little bit of a video dive on this and get some thoughts here. So what are your thoughts on kind of these three rule changes?
Yeah, so I actually watched some pieces of a couple of Champions Hockey League game yesterday. It's actually a super nice. If you're looking for like your midday fix next couple of weeks or the games are free on YouTube. Actually, the Champions Hockey League streaming is done. It's now I did deal with the slight English broadcaster over the Finnish broadcaster for about 5 minutes until they fixed the audio issue. So it was very weird. But it's the one that I like and I'm sold on right away. And I'm not sure how much it impacts the game because it's one of those, I can't give a full, I watched a couple games, right? Like we talk about sample size all the time on this show. So watching a couple games, it's hard to get a full scope of what it's going to be. I'm interested to maybe see what some data looks like this on after they get through the group stage and every team has played 6 games to see what it looks like. But the one I really like right away is you score on a delayed penalty, you still get a power play. I love that one. To me is the immediacy of that one should be a universal hockey rule. Just because you committed a penalty, just because you committed a crime, and now you're kind of semi left off the hook because you were bad before the punishment was levied. That was always kind of a weird one to me. So that one to me I love. That's the one where I think should be a blanket across the world hockey rule where you score on a delayed penalty, great. It's a bonus. I'm really interested to see. I like the other two rules in theory. I still have to see a little bit more of how it plays out to kind of before I come to my final conclusion on it. But I like it from the philosophy of you can create more offense. And it creates more offense twofold for me. Actually, threefold, sorry. For me, in kind of watching the game, now I don't know these Champions Hockey League teams, so I don't know how they're deploying their players. So I don't know whether they're intentionally using more offensive guys on the penalty kill than they would in the past or something like that. So I don't know if that was being done in these games. Also, one of the broadcasters was in German, so I don't speak German. And but it was, I think it opens up the realm of, okay, you have a team score, they're going to go if you get more goals. You have more power play time, you can have more goals. But teams with the opportunity to end a power play may take some more risks to put some more offensive mind, more of that power kill, because there's more of a reward now of you score a shorthanded goal, you kill off the penalty's over, and it's great. And then I think the other thing, and I think this is more of the long-term impact of a rule like this, I don't think it can impact something right now because there were still dumb penalties in the game I was watching. But I think over the length of a rule like this, as it becomes programmed into players' heads that penalties are all majors, once that becomes programmed in players' heads, I think you start to lose some of the other ticky-tack penalties that would probably come up in the past, because all of a sudden, once a player's head has become programmed that every single penalty is a major, you start to be a little bit more careful. You start to be a little bit more careful with your stick. And in theory, that opens up the 5-on-5 game to be a little less clutchy, grabby, a little bit less thick. I think that's the long-term impact of how it can be. And I saw some things that are interesting watching those games yesterday, but stuff that I think I really want to see and explore, and I want to talk about this topic again, like put a pin in this, and like in May or June, I want to talk about this again and take a look at like, hey, Champions Hockey League season has ended. This is what happened. But those are the things I'm really interested in seeing after watching some of these games yesterday and looking at some of these rules.
You know, that's interesting, because for me personally, the players at least should be programmed that they want to sit the full 2 minutes, right? So I obviously, in theory, you know, with it being a major, you know, if a team scores, you're not getting to come out of the box. You still have to sit in there. There's that component. I do wonder if there would be substantial changes to the way players played at 5-on-5. You know, with that, what I think would be potentially more driving them to be careful, you know, is along the same lines of you know, a team having the opportunity to score a lot of power play goals when they have those 2-minute minors. The caveat that I think is if you start playing those teams that have really potent power plays, I think those in those specific game situations, I would definitely imagine a team is a lot more careful. You know, especially if you're going against prime, you know, Washington Capitals, and you have to deal with Ovechkin getting to clap bombs, you know, for 2 minutes straight. I think that one's an intriguing one. I'm going to take a stance here, though, that I would hate the rule that allows the power play to continue after they score a power play goal. And the reason I'm going to say that is I think that would make a minor penalty overly punitive, particularly as we look at the NHL right now and you see the rise in power play success and you see the capacity of these power play teams. I mean, we're looking at about a league average or league median of 7 goals scored per 60 minutes in 5-on-4 play. And so if you think about that, let's put that into context, that on average, a team last year was shorthanded approximately 250 times. And so what that ultimately resulted in was a median shorthanded time of 420 minutes. However, if you are now saying that you have to go for a full 2 minutes on a minor penalty, that's now 500 minutes. That's an extra 80 minutes of penalty kill time, which at a league average is now working out to almost 9 or 10 more power play goals against. I think that's overly punitive for a team to have to deal with over the course of a season, an additional 10 power play goals against, resulting simply from the fact that they took the same number of penalties. So I actually hate that rule change and would be strongly against, placing that, because I do think it would just completely change what a minor penalty is in the function of the game. The one I do really like, though, is if a shorthanded team scores, they get to end the power play. And that's because, look, I take a penalty, I should have some shot at redemption, right? And so I would love to see exactly what you said, how that changes deployment on the penalty kill. Are you now, if you're the Edmonton Oilers, are you trying to sneak Connor McDavid out there more often? Are you trying to sneak him out there? Are you potentially having someone, flee the zone on a dump in or a dump out to try and retrieve that and potentially create a scoring chance? So I would really welcome that opportunity, because I do think it would create more aggression from the shorthanded team. And the interesting component I would like to see is, would power plays go back to a 3 forward, 2 defensemen setup versus the 4F1D that is predominantly taken over the NHL with nearly 90% of units being made up of four forwards and one defenseman. So I would love to see that chess match of how coaches choose to play. And, with the NHL being overly cautious, do you see power plays starting to go down to the two defensemen and penalty kills, still opting to play more careful? So that's the one I would love to implement. The other two, I'm sort of take it or leave it. I think the delayed penalty thing, sure, you should still get your power play. But I don't have to have that.
The thing I like most about this, conceptually at least, is a willingness to try something different. That's the thing I like most about this. I think because so often in hockey, it takes things like this to attempt to try things. A lot of people may not know, and a lot of the times the AHL works under the NHL umbrella, but the AHL is its own entity. They do run their own thing, and the AHL is the reason we have 3-on-3 overtime is because of the AHL experiment that they actually came up with themselves. I've actually talked to Dave Andrews about the former AHL CEO and president Dave Andrews about it, where the AHL actually came up with the initial 3-on-3 concept themselves and tested it out. And they actually tried a system that was, I remember covering it. It was, they had a 7-minute overtime at the time. They had a 7-minute overtime where it was, for the first 3.5 minutes, it was 4-on-4. The first whistle after 3.5 minutes, they went to 3-on-3 for the rest of overtime. And they tested that. And this Champions Hockey League, to me, is kind of the ideal testing ground for things, where it's, you get teams from various leagues, you get this stuff to try it out. If it doesn't work, okay. I think it's a great thing. The other thing this brought up, and I wanted to pose this to you, because we look at power plays and penalty kills and man advantage situations and trying to get more into game. So there's this type of solution. And there's another thing where back in the spring I was covering the USA. I was doing some work covering the USA Hockey. I think it was U16 Nationals down in Plymouth, Michigan. And down in Plymouth, it's 15 minutes from my house down. But they now have the rule in those leagues where you can't, icing is the same. You can no longer ice the puck if you're shorthanded. If you ice the puck, it comes right back for an offensive zone faceoff. And I want to throw it to you on that one. If you're looking at rules and things we would want to kind of to bring more offense into the game, because that's clearly what everyone keeps talking about. You look at some of these options, you look at kind of that icing rule. Where do your thoughts kind of lie on something like that?
I would love that. For me, it's just so odd that the shorthanded team gets rewarded. Obviously you want the penalty to be a penalty, but so why are you changing the way the game is played now because the team is shorthanded, right? You should still play the same hockey game where the same rules apply of icing. I don't understand why conceptually that rule is changed just because the team is shorthanded. Again, the purpose is to be appropriately punitive to the team that took a penalty. And so I don't think making a rule adaptation for them makes any sense. And so I would welcome seeing icing, continue for a team that's shorthanded. It would force those shorthanded teams to have to skate the puck out more. It would force, the opportunity for really, I shouldn't say the opportunity, but it would kind of challenge the power play defensemen to think about where are they going to step up? Do you try to step up on these guys at the offensive blue line to try and prevent them from being able to get down and clear the puck and potentially maintain possession while risking, them potentially going down and having an odd man rush that way? Or do you see them kind of back off and yield the center ice line and allow that dump in? I would really like to see how those two things play out. But I do think it'd be a great way to introduce some additional risk into the game, which is risk is ultimately what drives offense. Because if you give NHL coaches enough time with a rule change, they'll find a way to minimize risk. That's just the name of NHL coaching. So the more risk you sort of force them to reconcile with, they ultimately have to decide what's the trade-off here that leads us to the most minimized level of risk. And that's where I think, if you can add this in, it does add another layer of risk that they're not going to easily be able to minimize.
The icing one for me too, because it would be interesting where it would change the scope of like where the power play, the majority of the power play action, right? And like I wrote something about earlier this week, looking at the Red Wings zone entries for the power play. So much of power play time right now has to be focused on zone entries because so much is puck out, regroup, go back, and so much of the power play becomes so much more of a neutral zone game right now. There's times where a team gets set up and holds it for 2 minutes or whatever, but in general, it's the power play regroup has become basically one of the largest parts of the power play. By not being able to just ice the puck for free, you change the equation where now faceoffs become a little bit more important too, but you change the equation where the in zone, the focus of, like I'm doing my hand motions for people who are listening and not watching the video. I'm basically doing hand motions to represent all three zones on things right here. But all of a sudden my eyes are now more focused on just the offensive zone and therefore closer to the net and therefore the opportunity for a goal to happen more often. Like I think it's, I had one person who gave me a fair, criticism of this, and I will say is it does make the game longer. They said because someone who has coached younger kids and has reffed younger kids, they reached out to me and sent me a message on Twitter, and they said, "Hey, I understand what you're saying." Because I once tweeted about this. They said, "I understand what you're saying, but it can turn the game into a slog because some teams will still, and I don't know if NHL teams would do this, but some teams still just ice the puck and continue to ice the puck and be like, okay, we'll just we'll just try to win 10 faceoffs here and just keep icing the puck." So that is one of the risks involved with it, where it can turn that power play time into whistle, 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 and we don't want that. So, I'd be interested. Like it's one of those rules where I would love to see. It tested with like elite talent at like one of like the prospect scrimmage, like not for an entire tournament. Like next week, the Wings have their prospect tournament in Traverse City. Like I'd love to see it tested for a game or two. Like it's that type of thing where I'd love to see this tested with actual elite talent as opposed to not just the 13 and 12-year-olds who are like, well, we're just going to ice the puck over and over again. I mean, it's an interesting kind of thing because we want more offense, but we also don't want our game to turn into stoppage.
No, I totally agree. I think the other interesting kind of data component to this, in regards to that point that's raised is, if you look historically at where offense is generated, on the power play, it's most commonly coming off of an O-zone faceoff. That leads to possession, right? Because if you win an O-zone faceoff as the power play team, you automatically have achieved a controlled entry. And so historically speaking, when we've gone to evaluate, the performance of shorthanded players, it's the players that start a higher percentage of their shifts on the fly that ultimately have fewer shots against because they have an opportunity to deny a controlled entry. And so, I am curious to see what NHL coaches would opt for, particularly if you have, the icing rule where you allow the power play to choose which dot the power play gets to change. The penalty kill doesn't get to change. There's no stoppages that allow for, those guys to catch their breath while shorthanded. Do you start to win those faceoffs more and more and ultimately end up with more O-zone time if a team tries to continue icing the puck? That's what I'm curious about. And that's where we see more offense is winning those O-zone faceoffs and being able to start with possession in formation. I mean, this is all stuff that we've seen worked out from analysis. I've done this work with shorthanded players back in 2016. You can probably still track down that article. Eric Parnas, who's now an analyst with the Colorado Avalanche, did a lot of this work about time and formation coming off of faceoffs, resulting in more offense. So I do think it's kind of a double-edged sword where, a team may opt to throw the puck down the ice, but you're sort of inadvertently yielding controlled entries to a power play and sort of taking away your best opportunity to deny offense, which is denying an entry.
Yeah, I think it kind of it's where you're hitting that sliding scale, right? Of what is, at the end of the day, professional sports are about entertainment, and we're talking about this at the NHL level, right? Like, at the end of the day, professional sports are entertainment. Sometimes there are some people and teams and GMs in particular that need to remember that, and they don't remember that nearly enough. But I don't know where it is, but I would love to, whether it's a prospect tournament or another pro league testing, I would love to see, just to get a data set on that, just to be able to see, like, okay, to kind of be able to, like, okay, yes, we had 4 more stoppages per power play, but it also yielded an extra, teams were scoring an extra quarter of a goal every. Like, I would take that trade. Like, as from an entertainment product, I would take that trade. Like, do I want to take an additional 15 icings for a quarter of a goal? Probably not. I don't like that's probably where it starts to get a little bit much. So anywho, this is our open call on Expected by Whom. If you run a professional hockey league or a prospect tournament and want to tweak your rules and play with some things and everything like that, let us know. We'll have you on the show. So,
I think the other thing that I'll also just throw out there related to this before I move us along here is, I think if you consider the amount of games that currently go to overtime, and if you increase power play scoring, that thereby potentially increases an opportunity to not have the game go to overtime, is the net effect that you shorten the game, even if you take it? And what is the trade-off on the number of icings that have to happen where it results in a longer average game time than the current number of games that go to overtime? I mean, we're talking about what, 20-25% of NHL games get near overtime, if I remember correctly. I may be overstating that number a bit. I don't have it in front of me, but there's a lot of NHL games that are making to overtime. And so if you're thinking about that, the shootout, all of that comes from having a tied, closer game, and you have the opportunity to increase some scoring and increase some separation, maybe that's enough to shorten the average length of game. But who knows? That is why we ask people to think about this. And if you have very strong opinions on it, please let us know. And we would love to chat with you a little bit more about it. However, at this time, we are going to move to our very exciting interview that we've got coming up. On the show, we've had the luxury and pleasure to interview a lot of different people in NHL front offices. Today is no different. We'll be welcoming Sam Ventura of the Buffalo Sabres to join us and speak with us a little bit more. So please, tune into that, enjoy the interview, and without further ado, we'll get right into it. All right, folks, as promised, we're back with another special interview. Today we have the Vice President of Hockey Strategy and Research of the Buffalo Sabres, Sam Ventura, joining us. Sam, I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to talk with us today, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me on.
So, we're really excited because now we finally can round out our War on Ice trio of chips there, as we've had Andrew on, we've had Alex on, and now you are our final member of the original War on Ice trio. I want to talk to you a little bit about kind of your experience getting to work on War on Ice, because for me, that's kind of one of the seminal reasons I got into hockey analytics. And also from there, kind of your professional journey and how you decided ultimately that you wanted to work in hockey.
Yeah, well, first of all, I appreciate being the last of the three because I'll never live that down with Andrew and Alex now. So I appreciate that. Yeah, my professional journey, it really started at Carnegie Mellon University, where, as an undergrad, I was one of those undergrads that thought I knew what I wanted to do with my life. Ended up realizing I was wrong about that. So I thought I wanted to go into finance. I went into finance for a brief period of time and realized that I hated it, and ended up deciding to pursue some other paths. So the path that I ended up picking was I decided to go for my PhD in statistics, where I met Andrew Thomas. So Andrew who's now with SMT, as you know, was starting up a sports analytics seminar at the time. And that was really my first exposure to, how to use data to try to answer interesting questions around all of sports. So we were looking at the latest research and, what people were doing in various sports. There was a lot of stuff at that time in baseball and basketball. I mean, this is right when PitchFX data, for example, was becoming, was being made public. But there wasn't a whole lot going on in hockey, and we felt like there was an opportunity to make a contribution there. So, we created an R package called NHL Scraper that allowed us to collect data from the NHL's website, and we put it out there for free for everybody. And that's kind of the theme behind a lot of the work that we tried to put out there publicly was we wanted to make things accessible for everybody, and we felt that the best way for hockey to catch up to a lot of the other sports in terms of the development of new metrics and models and whatnot, would be to, make sure everyone had access to data, make sure everyone had access to team and player statistics, and to put all our code out there too, so that people could learn what we were doing and try to replicate it and build off of it.
I kind of, following up on that, you kind of mentioned the kind of the community growth of hockey analytics. And we've had many people from that community. On this show, we've talked about that. Just kind of the lack of being selfish on it, for lack of a better word, the lack of trying to keep the data to yourself or trying the tool to yourself. I mean, where does that kind of come from is that a mindset thing? Like when you kind of look at that, because I think it's been one of the fun things to learn more and more about the hockey analytics community is how much there hasn't been the selfish spot where someone's cut off the pipe where someone else could jump on and learn more.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, I think it's a little bit of a false choice. Like it depends on what your goals are, obviously. But, for us, our goals at the time, we were academics, so we wanted to get our research out there and establish credibility on that front. But ultimately, I think both of us were interested in working professionally in sports. And so I actually think, and if you're a student out there who's listening to this or a young professional or whatever, I actually think you're better off putting your work out there publicly because you'll get better feedback, first of all, and you'll learn more quickly. You're holding yourself to a higher standard because you can't hide behind, well, I'm keeping this secret, right? I'm putting all my code out here, and if it looks messy or if I made mistakes, someone will find it. So you're holding yourself to a higher standard. I just think it's better in the long run to just put everything out there and let it be critiqued publicly.
It's a lot of fun, and I'm glad you guys did that because, for those that don't know, I taught myself how to code in R off of your code in Hockey Scraper.
Oh, that's great.
And actually I try to adapt a lot of the stuff because you guys built a lot of the, visualizations or whatnot in base R, kind of prior to ggplot, coming through. And so being able to learn how to adapt, code was a tremendous, opportunity. And so I just selfishly like to put that out there that, there's still code out there you can go and find and take a look through, and it's still valid even several years later to give yourself a test at how well you understand.
Those were dark times. Base R that was not fun. But honestly, everything. There's so many people out there who have made all of those types of tools, remade them and made them with the more modern form of programming. So like Megan Hall comes to mind, but what Ron Yurko was doing with NFL football, publicly using their API and an R package that he created. It's all there's so many tools out there. If you're a young student or professional or whatever, it's pretty easy to jump in and teach yourself.
One of the things that you touched on a little bit there, but I wanted you to go a little bit back further to kind of some of your time at Carnegie Mellon and kind of their sports analytics groups, and I believe you've continued to kind of serve with their committee there as well. Just some of the stuff that I know you said there was initially a finance plan and it changed and everything like that, but just kind of part of that foundation and what you kind of took from there that kind of still obviously resonates till today and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two themes behind the Carnegie Mellon Sports Analytics program in general, and then also my time there. And like one would just be there's a dedication to creating reproducible research, and I want to stress both words there. The reproducible aspect we've already talked about, obviously, but the research aspect of it too. Like we're trying to push the frontiers of knowledge across all these sports that we're working on. So Andrew and I in hockey we're actively trying to discover new things. And, frankly, Andrew was a lot better than I was at that. But then same thing in football, and the other sports that people have worked on there. But it's really about pushing the public research forward. And that, that's sort of one pillar of what, we are and have been working on at Carnegie Mellon. The other one would be training. Training in reference to undergraduate students, master's students, PhD students, but trying to get people ready for the big leagues, right? And that's taken many different forms. So like when I was on the faculty there, for example, it took the form of, training undergrad students with, one-on-one research projects. Now that Ron Yurko has kind of taken over the show there, there's a lot of focus on, they have a summer program where they're bringing in a really, really diverse group of students to learn the basics of statistics, learn the basics of sports analytics, meld it together with presentation skills and writing skills and, how to effectively present data to non-technical audiences. And then, prepare the next generation of young professionals in sports analytics to jump into these jobs. And I really think they've done a fantastic job.
Yeah, I love everything that has been done, with that sports analytics camp. I mean, talking about your time there and sort of helping out. I mean, Katarina Wu, who's now with the Pittsburgh Penguins, came through that camp and got to work with you. And I always like to shout her out as a, fellow North Carolina person who's now big leagues with Pittsburgh. And so it's just kind of a tremendous opportunity for anybody that does have the chance to kind of stumble across that to get to participate.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many others too. This past summer, 2 summers ago, I worked with Jackie Jovanovich and Michelle Sesgin. Jackie's with the Pirates now in Major League Baseball, and Michelle is with the Mariners. Before that, there's Joe Reiner, who's with the Maple Leafs right now. And I'm certainly forgetting some, Tej Seth, who's with, I think PFF or one of the football companies, and a bunch of other, people have come out of that program. It's been really fantastic.
Yeah, it's absolutely awesome. And so kind of following your time at Carnegie Mellon, your time at Warren Ice, Andrew and Alex, they went to Minnesota. You ended up joining the Pittsburgh Penguins as a team consultant, and then later, have an opportunity to be a part of 2 Stanley Cup champion teams there. What did you learn about what did you kind of take away from your time in Pittsburgh in terms of learning about where data analytics fits into a sports organization, and ultimately what were you kind of able to take away that prepped you for your role here in Buffalo?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think the first thing, like when I first started, because, coming out of the public hockey Twitterverse, at that time, there was a certain perception of what it was like to work in professional sports and in professional hockey in particular. And the first takeaway I had was just that, everybody working in the sport is so much more intelligent than they're given credit for, or than they were given credit for at the time. And it really goes from, the very top, general managers and coaches, all the way down to, professional scouts, amateur scouts, training staff. People have really strong, so some of it's, just really strong intuitions, but like one thing I learned in hindsight was that a lot of what I thought I knew at the time when I started working in hockey was wrong. And a lot of what, they thought they knew, their intuitions were right. And, it wasn't until we got better data and really spent a lot of time studying that better data, that we were able to, really figure out that, a lot of the things that we thought we knew, actually weren't true.
You're now obviously working with your second NHL organization now with Buffalo, and you were hired by Buffalo. I think it was shortly before the draft in 2021, and basically tasked with revamping the analytics departments. Can you speak a little bit about the experience building the analytics department and how you kind of established trust so quickly and things along those lines?
Yeah, trust is an interesting thing. Like, you don't establish trust unless you have really, really good people working above you, really good people working alongside you, and really good people working below you. So, that part of it, establishing trust and buy-in and whatnot, it really starts with Kevin Adams and Don Granato and Jason Karmanos with the Sabres, and they are all very interested in objective decision making and bringing in different voices and really understanding what those different voices have to say. And so it starts there. Like when you have that buy-in from leadership, I think that's the most important thing that you can have for the success of an analytics department. And then probably the second most important thing, if not the most important thing, is I was in a position where I was fortunate when I was brought on. I was able to do some hiring, and I found two really fantastic people to work with me and really do the bulk of the hard work. And that's Matt Barlow, who's our data engineer, and Dominic Galamini Jr., who's our data scientist. And, those two, had a lot of experience coming from different sports organizations, both, in hockey and outside of hockey. But they also just had a tremendous skill set and a real knack for being able to connect, complicated hockey concepts with complicated data concepts. And having a team like that to work with every day is so important. It's really been invaluable to our success so far in building up the department.
Without getting too far into specifics on what is used in Buffalo, but can you speak about kind of how the quality of the data that you get available that has really changed since the quality of the data available to you that's kind of changed since you first started working in the NHL about a decade ago to now? And again, in the sec follow up that, which I'll make sure to reiterate, is how big is that gap now between what we see publicly versus privately is available to?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty big gap, frankly. There's obviously been publicly, there's been some versions of what I would call event level or play-by-play data that have been released to the public, either in small samples or from third-party companies, or people like Corey Schneider who are collecting it manually and whatnot. But I would say the gap between that versus what we were using to build War on Ice back in 2014 is pretty significant. And then you add on top of that, like, because we work for NHL teams, we have access to all the other stuff too. Like, we have puck and player tracking data now for the past, 2 or 3 seasons. We have internal scouting data. We have internal, other on ice information that we collect about, what's going on in the game that we have going back several years. And when you connect all that together, the other gap that I think exists is you really start to study the game in a different way. And I would say there's a gap in knowledge of what I know now about how best to use all that information and to make decisions in hockey versus if I had the same data 5 years ago but hadn't done anything with it. There's a huge gap there, and it really comes from just digging in and studying that information for years and looking at the successes and failures and trying to best explain, what has happened.
Yeah, and so I like to piggyback off of that a little bit. And so, one of the common refrains we always get about the private data in terms of what's available is just it is a massive undertaking to even turn that into something usable. And so kind of at a high level, and you can really only speak to it from your experience, but we've seen a lot of teams sort of moving in the direction of needing to have multiple people on board. You know, you mentioned Matt and Dominic as a data engineer and then as an analyst to be able to even get this stuff into usable, into a usable format for you guys to make decisions off of. So can you talk a little bit about kind of the variety of roles, or in terms of the number of people that you really need to have to kind of work with this magnitude of data?
Yeah, it depends on what you're trying to do, right? Like if you're trying to build a lot of fancy front end tools for coaches and management and whatnot, certainly you'll need not just your analyst and your data engineer, but you'll need software engineers and software developers and, people with web development experience and whatnot. If you're, like for us, being that we're a younger department relative to a lot of the league, we're really just trying to build our knowledge first. Like we've always put a focus on building knowledge before building, fancy front end tools. And for that, I think, it comes back to what I said before, and I don't want to praise Matt and Dom too much because their heads will get a little too big, but they really are excellent at taking the data and connecting it with hockey concepts and trying to learn something new about the sport there. So, I mean, Matt, as a data engineer, he's primarily responsible for getting the data into the usable form that you're talking about. And he does a great job of that. But, he brings a wealth of hockey knowledge that allows us to, not only do that more efficiently, but also to dive into research projects and learn more about what's going on. When you really dig into the nitty gritty of puck and player tracking data, it's pretty complicated. And, there certainly is some low hanging fruit. But the more interesting problems are, they require not only the technical ability, but the hockey knowledge as well. And Matt and Dom are really fantastic at that.
On the, we've had some other people on this podcast before, and we talked about kind of connecting that data with coaches and general managers and things along those lines. And you talked about potentially building tools and things like that. But one of the things that you said earlier in this interview that really reminded me of things other people have said is how you get into that room, you get in there, and you don't realize how smart some of these individuals are. You don't realize the level of knowledge that a lot of these people have. What's kind of the give and take like for you? And we've talked to people from Dallas, we've talked to people from Seattle about how there's projects that come to the analytics department or come to that where it's something maybe come from a coach or a GM or someone who's like, hey, I've always been curious about this, but I didn't have the tool or that department necessarily before. Like, have you had that type of experience? Obviously, without giving away too much, have you had that type of experience with Buffalo on that front?
Yeah. And I mean, those are the kind of things where, when they come up, we pretty much drop everything else to work on that. Because I mean, number one, I think it's important to recognize that, we have a lot of, we call it work as an analytics department, but like a lot of the stuff we're doing is, it's pretty deep in the weeds. And, ultimately, if there's a way that we can improve the on ice product in the short term, any small percentage point, that's where our focus needs to be. But absolutely. And I would say like it goes beyond just, like I think you mentioned coaches there. Like it goes beyond just coaches. And, it comes from scouts, it comes from management, it comes from player development, it comes from, sports performance, sports science, training.
You mentioned the, sports performance angle of it. And that's something where I know a lot of teams, that's kind of one of the things where some teams have already dove deep and some teams are getting like, is that a department like when it talks to athlete performance, care for athletes, sport performance, how much do you work hand in hand now with that department and how much has it kind of grown?
Yeah. I mean, the one thing about people who work in sports performance is they tend to be some of the most data hungry people, across all of sports. Like I think it's not just hockey and it's not just our organization, but across all of sports, it's a really, these people come from, heavy academic backgrounds and, the scientific field of sports performance really, it originated in Europe and Australia where, there's a different culture around, the use of data to try to improve athlete performance. And, that culture has come through to North American sports when you talk to, people who work in sports science or sports performance. So they are often the ones with the most questions, and it's been fantastic to work with them. We have two really, really smart people, really smart, talented people who head up that department for us, and Ed Gannon and Dean Higham. And, we have a back and forth with them on tons of topics, several times a week, I guess, really. There's some limitations to what we can do, with respect to, tracking, different biomarkers about athletes. Like, it's very different from what you're allowed to do, say, in Aussie rules football, where a lot of this research stems from. Where we have to find other ways of trying to improve athlete performance with the data that we are allowed to use. But it's a very fruitful relationship, and one that I think has been really beneficial for the On Ice product.
I do believe that's the first Aussie rules football reference we've had on the we've had on the.
Have you ever watched Aussie rules football?
It's awesome. I have. It's when my son was young, and he was still young, but when he was in the age of, he was waking up at like 4 a.m, and they would randomly have the Aussie rules football game on, like on FS2 or something like that. I started watching way more of it than I ever knew I needed to see, and it was great. So
yeah, you talk about an athlete; those people are athletes.
Yeah, it's great. So, not just Aussie rules football. You've, between your time at Carnegie Mellon, between other people you've talked to in the NFL and baseball, just what are some of the other things that maybe you've taken, or philosophies, or anything that in your career that you've seen from other sports that you've tried to bring into hockey, or anything like that? Because listening to you speak about all this stuff, there's obviously you spread your net wide and you try to find what fits and what doesn't and everything like that. So what are some of the things you look from outside the other sports world, in addition to Aussie rules football, that really kind of applies to your day-to-day now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on which version of Sam you're talking about. Like, if you're talking about Sam from the War on Ice days, then, a lot of the stuff that was really interesting to me back then was like applying like for lack of a better term, like the Bill James or Moneyball kind of techniques to hockey, and trying to project player performance across seasons and identify inefficiencies in free agent markets and whatnot. And that stuff's still, of course, very interesting and very important. But I think the more interesting fields of study for me, after I got behind closed doors working for the Penguins and the Sabres, was really trying to connect the ideas that have been in the public research literature for soccer and basketball to hockey. And, and the reason soccer and basketball, I mean, those are open flow sports where, there's a round object that we're trying to put into a net of some form, and, at least 5 people on the field of play at any point in time. And, it's pretty much the same thing from a modeling perspective, right? Like, if you're thinking about how to model the dynamics of those games, it's pretty much the same thing. And so we've tried to apply a lot of, the knowledge that had been gained from the head start that those sports had because of the data they had at a much earlier time than we did, to learn a lot about what, to apply that to hockey, so we could try to learn, as much as possible in as short a time window as possible. The other thing that I would say has been really important is, when the first NFL Big Data Bowl was released, and I want to say this was 2017, maybe it was 2018. I don't remember specifically now, but for background, Mike Lopez, who's the head of data and analytics with the NFL, made it a point when he started in that position to release a large sample of their player and ball tracking data to the public and host an open research competition. And I felt it was really important at that time, because we didn't have tracking data in hockey yet, to use that as an opportunity to build up a skill set that, would hopefully give me a little bit of an advantage when we did eventually get hockey data. And so what we did is I worked with a bunch of people at Carnegie Mellon, including Rashab Dutta, who's working for the Cleveland Browns now, Sarah Malapale, who's working for the Dallas Cowboys, Kostas Pellikrinas from Pitt, and I think maybe is doing some secret sports analytics work that I can't talk about, and Ron Yurko and a bunch of other PhD students at CMU. And we just dove headfirst into these research projects with American football. Now, American football and hockey are very different, but for me, it was more about, digging into the data and learning the dynamics of that type of data and how best to work with it, and what types of tools and models would be useful. And a lot of the ideas that we applied in those research projects, and we wrote a bunch of papers about it for that first Big Data Bowl competition. We're applying those same ideas and tools and models now when we're working with hockey tracking data. And I really felt like being able to do that and work with such smart people while doing it, and was really an opportunity for me to learn and just try to build up that knowledge base and that skill set, so that when the hockey tracking data did come, that we'd be ready.
So, you go, you do the research, you come away with your findings. Where does the role of communication come into play for folks that have kind of non-data science backgrounds when you're trying to explain what you found or what analysis you've conducted? We've heard a lot about kind of how important it is to have those strong communication skills. What do you sort of consider to be the keys to being able to communicate data science findings?
Yeah. Well, again, I think the most important thing is you have to have people who want to listen, right? So like, as I mentioned before, the fact that Don Granato and Kevin Adams want to listen. And then I would take that even down to our director of amateur scouting, Jerry Fortin. He wants to hear our perspective. Our director of pro scouting, Jeremiah Crow, wants to hear our perspective. Same thing for the sports performance people, the player development staff, and then those attitudes trickle down to the individual assistant coaches and scouts and everybody across the organization. They see how the leaders are behaving, and then they want to do things the same way. So I think that's most important. I think, when you actually get into the nitty gritty of communication, it's, what can you really say? But, what I would say is like framing things in the context of hockey, trying to speak the language of a scout, trying to speak the language of a coach is really important. So, learning as much as you can about hockey systems is really important. And when people throw a buzzword or a piece of lingo that you might not know, ask questions and try to figure out exactly what's going on. Because I think as much as you can, speak the same language as what they're speaking, you're going to be able to get your point across in a way that's more effective. So, and actually, Sean, can I take the role of interviewer here for a second? Because I think
of course, yeah.
This is my podcast now. You have a project. So I listened to the last episode in preparation for this, and you have a project that you're working on with respect to. Is it like defensive plays? Something about surfing, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to give a 20-second explanation.
Yeah. It was slightly stolen from football, where I have a good friend of mine, Bob Sturm, covers the Cowboys and tracks what he calls splash plays, it was kind of trying to take a similar concept to the defensive side of hockey, and I called it surf plays to stick with the water technology, and B, because great defensemen in my mind are more about controlling the flow of things than being splashy as they would be in football. And so that was kind of something that was my project that we talked about last week.
Okay. So that's interesting. So maybe I had a different, I didn't have the exact understanding, but the reason I brought this up is because, so the term surfing actually refers to a specific action that a defenseman will perform in the neutral zone when defending against the rush. And I thought you were maybe trying to collect that information and quantify it. I was going to commend you for
it is
a good idea for But it actually sounds like what you're describing is similar, right? So it's about taking time and space away from opposing puck carriers in the neutral zone, and I think they're maybe just extending that beyond.
Yeah, it's kind of, it starts with that's kind of the main tenet of it, where a lot of it. And now I have a history of covering Dallas, and I was the Stars beat writer for a bit, and so I covered Miro Heiskanen for a bit, and so it was one of the things that always popped into play for me is I would have people who were Stars fans who would ask, like, how do I know Miro Heiskanen is better than these other guys? Like, what can I watch? And it was a lot of those surf plays, a lot of this basically skating the 2-on-1 rush into nothing, where there's no puck touch, there's nothing out of the play, but he's basically just ending the play simply by angling and through his skating work. And that's kind of where the name partially came from the start of it. And then to also try to include some other things too, some other elements that include the flow of the game as well. It was kind of trying to expand it a little bit as well.
Yeah. So that's great. And I actually think this is a really interesting topic of conversation, because it gets into why hockey analysis is so challenging. So like for me, so Heiskanen, because of his skating ability, is able to take time and space away, so effectively, right? But a lot of times there's also an element of the system, the coaching system, that comes into play there. So for example, if Heiskanen's the weak side defender coming through the neutral zone, so not on the puck side of the play, depending on what system they're running, he might, what we would call surf and come across as the weak side defender to pressure the puck carrier. And then his defense partner will sort of drop back, closer to his own offensive zone blue line. And that's a system that coaches are running. And so getting into the ideas of disentangling the actions of individual players from their defense partners or their coaches' systems is, some of the stuff that we're thinking about these days. And it's really hard. Quite frankly, it's really difficult. Yeah. But I guess the point I'm making is the more you can understand the sport, and then the more conversations you can have about coaches, about not just what systems we're running, but we're pre-scouting an opponent, what kind of systems they're running, so we can better contextualize what we're seeing in the data from those players. It goes such a long way to being able to properly quantify the performance of individual players and teams.
It's trying to isolate moments within chaos, basically, right? Like that's one of the biggest challenges, right?
Yeah, chaos is a good word.
Yeah.
So Sam, I want to leave you with kind of one last question.
Wait, we're the hosts now? I thought you were taking over.
We're taking back host control. I got to leave you with one last question. So, for someone trying to get started, and someone saying, all right, I want to have a career in sports analytics, what is there any advice you can offer in terms of a path forward? Because it's been kind of crazy how much the landscape has changed just in the last 7-8 years, from how much information is out there, the different areas it's located and whatnot. Do you have any advice you could share for someone interested in getting started?
Yeah, for sure. And maybe if I could just start by just saying, the path that I took is not one that's easily reproducible, because I ended up just really getting lucky over and over again, right? Like I got lucky that I happened to pick a graduate school where Andrew Thomas was starting a sports analytics seminar, and I got lucky that was happening, in the early 2010s when hockey analytics was in its infancy. I got lucky that, we got lucky that, there were other sites at the time, like Extra Skater, for example, that were shut down and really, opened up a hole for us to fill with War on Ice. We got lucky that, Alexandra Mandrycki was, available and wanting to join our team because of, how incredibly talented she is. We really, like, I got lucky over and over. So the best advice is just get lucky, right? But then, short of that, I think there's some nuggets of good advice within there. So one would just be, find really good people to work with. You don't have to do this alone, right? So find a good professor, find a friend, find someone with some experience, either in the sport or, in the research world, who can help guide you, as you're kind of, tiptoeing your way into the sports analytics world. And then second, I guess tying it back to our first, topic of conversation is really, I think you have to put your work out there publicly. When we're evaluating candidates for jobs, we're so much less concerned with like what's the specific sentence that's written on your resume. And we're so much more concerned with just like clicking on your GitHub profile and, seeing, what you've actually done, right? Looking at your code, looking at your projects, looking at your front end presentation of all that. That is so much more important than, reading the actual resume, when it comes down to it. So, how do you get to that point? You have to actually do the work, right? So you have to, enter yourself into the big data bowl or, the big data cup or, whatever it would be, all these various, open source, research competitions around sports analytics. Find some data that you think is interesting, find a problem that you think is interesting and start working on it. Put your work out there publicly. Look for feedback. Like it doesn't have to be perfect, right out of the gate. Just showcase that you're a really talented person. That's what, like when we hired, Dom Galamini, I have been aware of Dom's work for, probably close to a decade, or whatever it was, whenever he started working publicly and I was with War on Ice. I've been aware of that. And so, he had established a reputation in this field, for many years. Same thing with Matt Barlow, who had been doing public work and, bounced around across sports, but was always still very willing to share his time and share advice with people in the public. And I think just, being open and, putting your work out there, it goes such a long way. And I can say that from someone who's done it and also someone who's hired people, just how important it is.
Sam, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us today. Really appreciate all of your insights and look forward to catching up with you sometime soon.
Yeah, and I'll email you the rest of my questions. So
yeah, we'll make sure we get those back. We'll have another episode where we turn the host control back to you.
Yes.
Yeah. But I appreciate you guys having me on, and it was a fun conversation.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you, Sam.
Yes, thank you.
All right, folks, that was Sam Ventura, Vice President of Hockey Strategy and Research with the Buffalo Sabres. We can't thank Sam enough for his time, joining us and spending enough time answering all of these different questions that we've got, and being so transparent with us. As always, if you'd like to support our show, please subscribe to the Wingwheel Podcast on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Wingwheel Podcast. By subscribing, you're not only unlocking more great benefits like Wingwheel Podcast exclusive Discord, which has an Expected by Whom channel, bonus episodes, and more. You're also supporting us as we're a part of the Wingwheel Podcast Content Network. All right, so to wrap us up here, Sean, you made a very amusing observation on the NHL schedule that I think I have never seen anything like this before, including previous Global Series summits when, because back in 2012 or 2013, the Red Wings went overseas and played St. Louis. I remember that. I've never seen anything like this. So can you walk us through a little bit on what the NHL is doing to the Arizona Coyotes in the month of September?
Yeah. So I was looking at the schedule the other day, and I was trying to just figuring stuff out. And so this is preseason hockey, and we all know the Coyotes and Kings are going to start the season in Australia. They're going to play in Rod Laver Arena, which is, I believe, the venue for the Australian Open. Which is great. The Coyotes and Kings are gonna go play there. I actually know there's a pretty good hockey fan base in Australia. Actually, I've spoken to people from Australia at hockey games in the United States before of comments. So I think that's a pretty cool thing that the league is doing it now. However, the Coyotes are playing that game technically at 12:05. So 12:05 a.m. So they'll be playing a game till roughly 2:30 Eastern time in the morning, right? They then have a game at 3 p.m., 12 hours later, against the St. Louis Blues at the Enterprise Center. 5 hours later, they have a game at 8 p.m. against the St. Louis Blues in Wichita. It doesn't stop there. About 2.5 hours after that game ends, around midnight, technically on Sunday, but on Saturday, they play the Kings again. And then, to finish it all off, the same day, they play the Dallas Stars at 6 p.m. The Coyotes are tackling the fateful 5-2. The 3-3 is illegal in the NHL now. By the way, it's against the CBA. Teams are no longer allowed to play a 3-3. It's still a thing in the AHL, but it's not allowed in the NHL. But for the preseason, the Coyotes are tackling the daunted 5-2. So it's hilarious to look at on the schedule, and in a second we'll go over how it is. But it's the 5-2. Let's embrace that for a moment.
Not only is it the 5-2, it's the 5-2 playing games in Australia, Kansas, Missouri, and is the game against Dallas in Dallas, or is it in Arizona? Because
it's actually in Austin. The game against Dallas is in Austin. So
5 games, 2 days, 4 different locations. Absolutely unbelievable. I would love to know what method of travel the NHL has arranged for the Arizona Coyotes to get from Melbourne, Australia to Wichita, Kansas, and or is it St. Louis that they're going to first? Because I have done the flight to Australia twice from Detroit. Let me tell you, that is a long flight. But all jokes aside, it sounds like the Coyotes have a plan on how they're gonna roll out kind of different rosters for each of these games. So, Sean, I think you have the lowdown on what they're going to be doing here.
Yeah, this is not there's no TARDIS or a time turner thing going on here that the Coyotes have access to, even though that would be a great story in itself. But yeah, so Craig Morgan, who is by far the best resource on anything Coyotes, and I was texting with Craig the other day about this, and hey, he will be in Australia, where the main NHL roster will be. They're sending the Clayton Kellers, the Logan Coolies of the world, I guess the Matt Dumba signed there, right? Like they're going to Australia. The team in St. Louis, going to the game in St. Louis, will be the AHL roster, essentially the Tucson Roadrunners. And then the team going to Wichita, playing the other St. Louis split squad, and will be, I guess you could call it the Coyotes. It's going to be PTOs, some extras, and a couple top prospects like Connor Geekie, Maverick Lamoureux. And I'm assuming the NHL is giving the Coyotes a bit of a slight waiver on this, because for people who don't know, there is a rule for preseason. You have to play 8 veterans. Now, the veteran rule is very lax. Like any player that's played 100 career NHL games as a veteran, any player that played, I believe for a skater, any player that played more than 40 NHL games the prior season counts as a veteran, and any first round pick from the last 3 years, I believe. I might have to double check myself on that, but I believe that any first round pick from the last 3 years counts as a veteran. So veteran is a very loose term. But basically, it's the NHL saying you have to put someone on the ice because someone is in theory paying for the tickets to this game. And you have to put someone on the ice that represents NHL talent. Now, I'm assuming the NHL is going to give the Coyotes a little bit of leeway. They have the bodies to do it. NHL training camp rosters are big. They'll have the bodies to do it. They probably had to sign extra PTOs to get this done, honestly. Keep a couple extra kids from junior who get an opportunity to play. I'm actually more fascinated in who's coaching. I'm more fascinated on this. So you're gonna send your full coaching staff. You're not sent all of your NHL coaches. are going to Australia. You're sent. That's the team you're building for the season. You're not skimping on resources there at all. So, okay, you can have your age. Are you going to have your AHL coaching staff coach? Are you going to split? Now, most AHL coaching staffs, though, the typical AHL coaching staff right now is about 3 people. It's getting larger, but in general, the typical AHL coaching staff is typically a head coach and 2 assistants, and a goalie coach and a goalie coach here and there. So, are the Coyotes going to have a goalie coach, an AHL goalie coach, coaching as a head coach for a game? Are they going to have an ECHL coach from their affiliate called up? I'm actually fascinated by the coaching element of this, of how the Coyotes are going to handle this, because, I mean, it's preseason hockey, but it's just hilarious to look at the schedule where the Coyotes, like, the NHL preseason standings will come out on Monday, September 25th, because they do keep those. They do keep those standings, and the standings will come out Monday. Every team in the league will have played 1 game. Arizona will have played 5. There'll be standings Monday morning with Arizona 5 games played. Every other team, well, LA with 2. Every other team 1. So,
I'm going to say 2 things here. 1, get prepared for the Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, Josh Bailey, Thomas Tatar PTOs in Arizona to be able to fill out their 8 veterans. I think that would be absolutely hilarious. Give me the 1 game of those guys in a Coyotes uniform on a PTO just to fulfill the NHL requirement. And then 2, Bill Armstrong, if you're listening, I'm more than happy to coach in St. Louis or Wichita for you. I'll take my own flight there. If you need a coaching staff body, just let me know. I'll try some stuff out. It'll be very interesting. I'll have a lot of fun with it. The fans will get their money's worth because, the minute I go with 2 goalies on the ice or something like that, I think people will it'll get people talking about the Arizona Coyotes. So I just want to put that nugget out there. More than happy to coach for you.
We're talking 5-man forward units on the 5-man forward units on the power play. We're talking, we're going full. What are we doing when you're getting this task? What's the how are we running? What penalty killer are we running? What's the let's sell.
The first thing.
Let's sell this.
Yeah.
I want this is a serious note. Bill, if you're listening, he's serious about this. He will book the flight. He will be there. Let's book the flight. Yes.
So things that I've always wanted to try out. People always say, what happens if you stuffed all the players in the net? Would you give up a goal? So let me stuff 5 of the players and just let 1 guy go out and try and score a goal. I guarantee we don't give up anything. That would be an interesting concept. I might want to try that for a period. I want to see how the Flying V actually works if you can get onside with it. Because I never understood in the Mighty Ducks movies how that play was onside. It can't be. I mean, because and if it is where you're passing the puck up to the guy that's in the lead, how are you not just trucking them if you're the defense? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So I gotta see how that plays out. But in all seriousness, I want to try out some stuff. 5 forwards on a power play. That's starting to get a little bit of traction in the NHL. There was a small percentage of teams that utilized it, but let's try 5 forwards on the power play and see how that goes. On the penalty kill, you have a lot of teams that really want to sit back in this soft, check press, if you will. But in reality, I think what you want to have is allowing as many shots from the point as possible and minimizing the ability for the puck to move down the half walls. So I would almost consider going with more of a box approach, a 2-and-2. Let the guys have the shot from the point. Let it be a clear lane in the way these 1-3-1s set up. You're not beating most NHL goalies, even most AHL goalies, on a 60-foot shot from the point that's not screened. And so I want to try out a couple of concepts there with kind of specific pressure on the half walls, which is where these power plays are really, trying to operate and create. So, I've got some ideas here. Give me a shout. We'll have some fun with it. And I guarantee people will pay good money to see this.
Can I give you one more to try?
One more. Yeah.
So I've got this idea because I was doing some freelance work for something else in the lacrosse world. And I was going through and I got caught up watching a bunch of lacrosse videos and how much lacrosse uses substitutions in the flow of the game, where there are players committed only to face-offs. There are long stick midfielders who are used defensively, short stick midfielders who play offense, and there's the constant flow of maximizing your assets positionally in lacrosse. I would love to see a team defensive zone face-off. I would love to see a team with the full thought concept of, now you have to have good skating defensemen to do this, but 2 forwards, 3 defensemen off the defensive in the defensive zone draw. 2 forwards, 3 defensemen off the defense. If we lose the draw, if we lose the draw, that works. We win the draw, the third defenseman's job is going right to the bench. And he's basically springing the forward who's jumping off the other side of the bench, who's basically running a go route to the opposite blue line. Like, I just, like, the full, like, using your, kind of stealing a bit from lacrosse of, like, having a long stick midfielder going to the bench for a short stick midfielder and basically hitting it on a run and using kind of the bench as a go point for transition. I'd love to see someone test the play off the defensive zone.
So basically, you want to have that play run, and you have someone in the defensive zone basically execute the Henrik Sedin, full length slap pass to Daniel that they used to do with that ricochet timed off the boards to kind of come right into the middle of the net, right in the middle of the slot. I love it. More than happy to give that a shot. That makes perfect sense, especially in the second period when, I've got my bench right by the offensive blue line. I can literally have the guy sitting on the edge of the bench, and he doesn't come off until, and when he comes off, he drops right onto the blue line. Perfect timing. I think that makes a lot of sense. So, folks, if you're listening and you have a direct line to the Coyotes front office, please make sure you give them a call. We are here to experiment, come up with fascinating ways to revolutionize the NHL. And so without further ado, we'll wrap things up here. That's another episode of Expected by Whom. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please direct those to the direct messages of Ryan Hanna on X or Twitter, if you so please.
I am worried that this may be the last episode because you're going to get a head coaching job, and I'm going to have to do this by myself next week. So I'm worried. You
know what? I think we can make both things work.
Yeah.
We'll see. We can definitely make it work.
Yeah.
But you know what, folks? You'll have to tune in next time to find out.